Hey everybody, it's Dave. Welcome back. I am finally back from vacation. I'm not too sure I'm ready to be back and jumping back into the cold weather here in Canada, but there's only so much the 30 plus degree weather I can handle either. Anyway, it was a good time. I hope you had a good week and a half or so that I've been gone. I know we did have that earnings call, and I did a quick impromptu live stream just off my phone talking about those results. So thank you to everyone who did tune into that, especially to the two of you that did give super chats during that live stream. That was very much appreciated. Today, I obviously want to talk about the earnings call since I did miss it, but I'm going to focus in on the financial side of things. I know there's always like a bunch of news items and some kind of bigger picture stuff in terms of technology and things like that to talk about, but probably equally important or even more important is diving into the numbers, how these numbers we're getting fit into the financial model for the future, like what I was projecting they would make versus what they're actually making. And I was really zeroing in on this specific quarter for quite a while. The reason for that is we always get pretty accurate guidance for the next quarter. So that means we now have pretty good idea of what the full year's numbers are going to come out to be. We have the previous 3 quarters already, and we have guidance for Q4. Beyond that, we also did get some bonus guidance for Q1, which I was quite pleased with. So the numbers around this quarter were actually even more focusing on the projections for the future as opposed to what came in Q3. In a lot of ways, Q3, we knew what was going to happen. We knew that they had that anomaly. Thank you for chiming in, Teddy. And we knew there weren't going to be very many launches, and that was going to have an impact on the bottom line. So while Q3's numbers, under the circumstances were pretty good, I wouldn't call them stellar. Obviously, we would have preferred never to have that anomaly, to have more launches. But considering the circumstances, I think they were pretty good. And even more important is looking at that future guidance and trying to fine tune and make adjustments to the financial model I made last year and try and get an idea of where the company's going, how much money they're going to be making, and what kind of a stock price those profits would justify. So let's dive into that. Just quick though, before we do, if you haven't subscribed, and apparently according to the analytics, around 40% of the viewers are not subscribers. So if you are not a subscriber and you would be interested in subscribing, I would definitely appreciate it. Thank you guys so much if you are already a subscriber. Likes always help out with the algorithm. With that out of the way, let's dive into some spreadsheets and some numbers and take a look at the future value of Rocket Lab. Okay, before we do dive into the spreadsheet, I just want to show you the information I'm pulling to build out the model, build out the valuation and where it's coming from. So you can make your own assumptions if you disagree with some of my assumptions in the information that I'm drawing off of. It's a combination of the investor presentation, the earnings call, and also that 10Q SEC filing that comes out every quarter. So first of all, we got told that there will be 22 Electron missions in 2024, or at least 22 are booked right now. Things can always change. They could slot in additional missions. They could have to reschedule missions. But right now, 22 for 2024 is looking pretty solid, which I am personally extremely happy with. I think that's amazing growth versus just 11 of this year. That is really a double. Absolutely amazing. And I know we wanted 15. We only got 11. But still great growth for next year. I'm extremely excited about that. So obviously I will be plugging in 22 launches into that 2024 timeline. We also got some information on their profitability trends, taking a look at the gross margin numbers throughout the past 4 quarters. It's been trending up pretty nicely. Obviously Q3 not so much, because once again, we had that failure, less launches than expected, less revenue than expected means worse margins than expected. So a bit of a dip there from 32 to 29 non-GAAP gross margin. but we do expect that trend to continue moving upward and to the right. Now, these gross margin numbers are going to be extremely important when thinking about the spreadsheet later on, so that is definitely a number to keep in mind, something I will be referring back to as I kind of try to figure out what I think the trend is going to look like on this number going forward. From the 10Q here, we had some information on, the revenue growth versus the previous period in time. So again, this quarter, a little bit disappointing. The revenue growth in Q3 of 2023 versus Q3 of 2022, 67 million versus 63 million. So not massive growth, not that kind of hockey stick kind of chart that we were promised in the post-SPAC investor presentation. And a little bit better if you're zooming out to the previous 9 months versus just this quarter. That scenario, we're looking at 16% year-over-year growth, but still, 16%, not really what I'm looking for from Rocket Lab long term. I'm looking for higher numbers than that. You probably are too if you're an investor. If you're investing in a growth company that is not yet profitable, generally you want to see a higher number than 16. But I do think this has kind of been a growing period, and we're about to kind of hit another level going forward. More on that in a minute. Financial outlook for the next quarter and Q1 2024. This is another important slide we'll be referring back to, but basically we can expect 65 to 69 million in revenues next quarter. Space Systems will be 48.5 to 52.5 of that. The remaining will be launch. It's only 2 launches, so 16.5 launches. So even the anomaly impacting Q4 for the number of launches, and it's kind of weighing on the back half of this year, but we are going to hopefully make up for that next year, as the revenue guidance for Q1 2024 looks very strong to me. We're talking about 95 to 105 million. So if you're looking at quarter over quarter, that's obviously massive growth from 65 to 95. That's very impressive. Of that, Space Systems, 65 to 86. And even more of that growth coming from launch, 30 to 37 versus just 16.5. So we're looking at pretty much a double in launch and some pretty decent growth in Space Systems as well. We also have some information on the gross margin numbers, expecting GAAP gross margin to be between 24 to 26 and non-GAAP to be between 30 to 32. So going back here, we had around 29 non-GAAP, and we're looking at next quarter being 30 to 32. So continued improvement there as well. Also information on operating expenses, 61 to 63, and non-GAAP OPEX, 50 to 52. So more important numbers for the spreadsheet. We're going to get to that soon. Just a few more things to show you from the 10Q here. Mention of the backlog. This quote was the interesting part to me. The remaining backlog now totals about $582 million as of September 30th. And 57% of it is expected to be recognized within 12 months. So the remaining 43% obviously would be recognized beyond that 12 months. This is going to be very important. We're going to do some quick math on these numbers to try and figure out what 2024 is going to look like in just a minute. Continuing on, though, taking a look at how stock-based compensation has shaken out, and also those taxes. Those are also going to be important numbers. Income tax rates, this is good to see, actually, because I was, in my spreadsheet building out how much income tax I thought they would pay. Effective tax rate seems, lower than I expected, so we'll be making some adjustments. Also, stock-based compensation expenses, not too massive, and they're not really growing so much here. So 2023, the 9 months ended at September 30th. We've had 43 million stock-based comp. In 2022, those same 9 months, 43 million. So pretty much flat. and even slightly down for just this quarter. So nice to see the stock-based compensation isn't growing, and that's another adjustment I will be making because I was assuming the stock-based compensation would, tick up a bit more. This loan, when I originally built out the model back in, I think, 2021, 2022-ish, probably 2022, wasn't aware that they had this loan, but it is now matured. So it basically, they'll owe $100 million to pay off this loan on January 1st, 2024. However, they are planning to refinance it. So basically continuing with that loan. And then it's always interesting to take a look at the segments and see, how much each side is growing and how much money each side is bringing in. So for just this quarter, Space Systems had a year-over-year revenue growth of 15.6%, and Launch actually shrunk because of that anomaly once again. They only had a year-over-year growth of -7%. So, rough numbers there, but we knew they were coming for Launch. In terms of the 9-month period, so the first 3 quarters of the year, some little bit better numbers here. 10% for Space Systems, going up to 121 from 110, whereas Launch has 30% growth, going from 48 to 68. So Space Systems did experience massive growth, a year before. So I guess we're kind of digesting those assets that were purchased, and hopefully we do get to see more growth rates in the future, as I really do expect Space Systems to grow more than 10% annually going forward. So that's something to keep an eye on. Again, we have much more clarity on Launch. Seeing that 22 Launch number for next year means we can have a lot of confidence that unless something goes very wrong, Launch revenues will for sure be going up by significantly more than 30%. So, subsequent events, not a big deal here, but they sold their helicopter that they were using for Launch for about $3.9 million, I do believe. And just talking about build rate, this is from the 10Q. They do mention, I thought it was interesting, they built 8 Electrons in 2021, 12 in 2022, and plan to build 13 in 2023. So 2023, once again, the build rate not increasing that much, but reusability should hopefully allow them to be more efficient with those vehicles and get more value out of them. So, I think this number is pretty solid. It'll be interesting to see where that build rate settles as they do start to reuse a lot of these rockets depending on the mission parameters. Cash on hand, I figured I'd just highlight this quote. I did make a video about the potential for raising cash a little while ago. They do say that their existing cash and equivalents and payments from customers will be sufficient to meet their needs for at least the next 12 months, but they do say we may choose to take advantage of opportunistic capital raising or refinancing transactions at any time. So they are saying right there they could potentially raise capital in the future. I think it's becoming more likely rather than less that this will happen at some point. And I just hope if they do it, they get a good price for it. And hopefully the share price is a little higher than now, maybe more like to the $7 or $8 range. I would be okay with that. Okay, finally, the quick math. I wanted to talk you guys through thinking about the revenue numbers for next year. So they told us straight up revenue numbers for Q1 are expected to be between 95 to 105, so that's pretty easy for Q1. We have the breakdown as well between Space Systems and Launch. I showed you that previously. So we have Q1 down. Now, they also did say the backlog number, and they did say that they're going to recognize 57% of it within the next 12 months. So if we do some math, what's 57% of this backlog number? That's $331 million. But the next 12 months is not, the full year 2024. So let's subtract out the guidance for Q4, which is in the mid-range, $67 million. That brings the recognized revenue for the remaining 3 quarters after that to $264 million. Subtract out the 100 million that is the midpoint of what we are expecting for Q1 next year. That means $164 million recognized for Q2 and Q3 of next year. Assuming the big question mark is, could they add any additional backlog and recognize that revenue within the 12 months? I don't know. I think it's probably unlikely, but I would love to hear your thoughts on that. If it's potential that, they sign new deals, new customers, and execute on those within 12 months, maybe that means there's room for, upward movement on some of these numbers. Just being safe here, though, I'm assuming that they're not adding any new backlog and recognizing that. We're averaging for Q2 and Q3, $82 million. So that's a bit of a drop from Q1, but Q1 a very big quarter. And $82 million, still pretty solid compared to what we've been seeing over the past couple quarters. So, I think it's reasonable. Then we have to guess what we're doing in Q4. And, we know we have 8 launches massively, because going back here, we can see 8 launches they shared. I believe that will be the most ever for any quarter, so I'll be very excited to see that. But if you average 7.5 million per launch, you're looking at 60 million for the launch side of the business in Q4. Then we've got to try and think about, okay, well, what would Space Systems be making? And I don't want to go too crazy. I want to keep it relatively conservative when I make these guesses, and so I'm not way off to the upside. If I'm making a model or estimates, I'd rather be off to the downside than off to the upside, because, if I think it's good and I'm underestimating what they're going to do, that's okay. That's great. That's just a bonus. But if I overestimate what they do, then that's when you can get into some pain. So I thought 68 million seems pretty fair for Space Systems revenue. Q1, they're talking 65 to 68. So that's basically flat. Now, generally, you do get growth, but assuming Q1 is kind of a big quarter for them, I think having a flat number is pretty safe. I think they should be able to hit it by Q4, although we could always plug in a slightly lower number if we wanted to be safer. This is what I landed on, though. You can always, plug in your own number if you want. That brings the total revenue for Q4 to $128 million, which would be very exciting. That would be definitely by far the biggest quarter they've ever had. Maybe not the first $100+ million quarter if they do hit over 100 in Q1, but a very strong quarter for the company. Those 8 launches playing a big part on it. And actually, if you take a look, the launch catching up very quickly to Space Systems, getting more of that 50-50 kind of split, whereas before we were looking at kind of 1/3 versus 2/3. So if you add up all these numbers to get a kind of rough estimate of what we think revenues could look like, I landed on about $392 million. And now that we have guidance for Q4, we know that 2023's numbers should land around $251 million. That represents a 56% increase in revenue. And this is what I want to see, right? 50% is great. 40% is pretty great too. 30% is good. 20, now we're talking, So while these numbers may not look so great for the growth from, say, 2022, it seems like growth is set to accelerate here in 2024, and it's pretty exciting. So those are some numbers that I'm going to be using for the 2024 revenues. Let's now dive into the spreadsheet, see how this jives with what I originally predicted a year or so ago when I was trying to map out their future revenues, and make some updates to the valuation model now that we have more numbers for the remainder of 2023 and even, a pretty good guess on 2024. Okay, so I know this is a long video, it's very numbers heavy, but I do think it's extremely important for every investor to go through these exercises if they are going to invest in individual companies, especially ones that are not yet profitable. So now that we have basically the numbers for for 2023, plus or minus a few million, depending on where Q4 lies, let's take a look at how I did on my predictions. So 2023 update here, you can see I was off on the revenues. I had a big jump projected up to 330 million. To be honest, I'm not sure why I landed on that number. I'd have to go back and maybe rewatch that video or rethink about it. Looking at it right now, obviously it sounds high, and with hindsight, it definitely was high. If we even look at the original chart from the investor presentation, 2023, they said they'd be making $267 million. So I was even way ahead of that SPAC presentation, which I do tend to think was pretty optimistic. So clearly I was way off on that one by about, $80 million. So this is the real number, 251 for 2023. Perhaps a little disappointing because of that anomaly. Definitely wasn't planned into my model, but these things happen in the space industry. Cost of goods sold was actually much lower than I thought. I think I was a little high on that number in terms of the gross margin being low, so that's nice to see. And they did have more money on SG&A and R&D than I did model in. I think a lot of that is Neutron spending, more of that falling into the R&D and SG&A as opposed to cost of goods sold. So what does that mean for the year? Well, for 2023, I was pretty clearly overly optimistic. We have a net income number. I was estimating around $130 million. Real number is 177. These are obviously in the negatives. That's what the brackets mean. So that's kind of the negative cash burn situation. So the other thing that was interesting, though, is I did estimate a pretty big amount of stock-based compensation, but it was a bit less than I actually thought, so that's nice to see. There's only 487 million shares outstanding, and I was thinking 499. So I will be adjusting those shares outstanding numbers down as well for future years, as I think the rate that they are issuing those new shares for stock-based compensation, at least, is lower than I was originally expecting. So that's good. The fact that the cost of goods sold seems to be a bit better than I was thinking, that's good too. But definitely some adjustments need to be made here. And by the way, guys, as I build out these spreadsheets, I'm still learning as I go here, and I'm just sharing my thoughts in real time as I do it and as I learn and as I research. So when I share these things, I never claim to have all the answers and be 100% right for sure. I'm open to being wrong and learning, and I'm just, sharing my real-time thoughts. So obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the numbers I'm about to go through. Everyone, might have slightly different expectations, and that's the great thing about these spreadsheets. You can just plug in different numbers, and then you get the calculations, and it spits out what, the stock would be worth in those scenarios. Now, jumping over to the revenues page, trying to figure out how much money they're going to make before subtracting all those costs, we can see that I had 15 launches in for 2023, actually 11. That's going to hit the revenues on the launch side of things. And we also have a projection for 2024, which is 22 launches, whereas I only had 19. So that's good news. That's, I guess, a beat against what I was thinking. I am adjusting down the average price. I guess I had kind of bumped up the cost of Electron for inflation, thinking they might sell for more of an average price around 8. They are saying 7.5 for next year, so I'm putting in 7.5. And then just looking at the future, this could vary wildly in terms of future Electron launch numbers. It's really hard to say. So they talk a lot about the target being 24 launches, and that's when they hit their gross margin target and kind of the system being complete. So I kind of have them in 2025 hitting just one more launch, and then 24, 26. So thinking the steady state is around that 24 to 26 number for demand in the small launch space. You may think different. Maybe they can launch 30 times in a year. Maybe worst case scenario, launch demand for the small launch space starts to drop off, and then I have to lower these numbers. I'm just kind of steady stating it around 24, 26-ish. Let me know what you think on those numbers below. But that basically gives us a gross profit number in right here for Electron. They have said they gross profit, it would be around 50 to 52% when they hit that 24 launch. Okay, so now for Neutron, I have actually adjusted my numbers a little lower. I'm thinking I may have been a little overly optimistic with how fast Neutron is going to grow. So originally for Neutron, I had no launches, at least no paying launches 2024, because we know that first launch is not paid. It's going to be, some sort of test payload. After that, we have 3, 6, 9, 13 is kind of how I had it growing. Maybe that was a little overly aggressive. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Maybe it wasn't. It's hard to say for sure. Peter Beck did say they're kind of bootstrapping it and building out the capability as they go. It'll kind of follow a similar path to Electron. Now I have 0 2024, 2 paying launches 2025, so maybe that first launch does end up falling 2025 without a payload, and then 2 others. 4 2026, 7, 11, 16 as kind of the growth rate. Let me know what you think about that. Is it too conservative? Is it too aggressive? It's really hard to say with these ones, and new rockets always have problems. So yeah, it could be anything, but I do think once you start to get out, a few years after it's become operational, plus with the reusability from the get-go factor, we're starting to get, I think it'll grow rapidly after the first couple years. Also increasing revenues per launch a little bit for inflation. And then space systems, we kind of have to decide how much revenue growth there's going to be there in the next several years. I kind of guessed around 30% for 2024, then 25, 25, 25. So it seemed reasonable, 25% growth per year on space systems for the most part. Let me know if you think that's low or high. And the margin number, I have them, pushing up towards 50 as well. I believe they did say they would hit that 50% gross margin on the space system side of the business, minus Solera, which would be more like 30%. But yeah, so that's what we have for projections going out an extra year to 2029. And I think here is a big question mark. Once we get out past, say, 2025, I think we have to start talking about space applications. It's hard to model. It's almost impossible to model, really, because we don't know what it will be. We don't have enough information to model anything on it. So I'm just leaving it blank, question mark, to be addressed in the future when we get more information, meaning our current model, we're going without it. Do keep in mind, though, that if they build out their own satellites with space applications, then some of their launches and some of their capabilities for space systems will go to their own capacity, meaning they don't get paid right away by a customer, but they start getting recurring revenue down the line. So that could have a big impact on how the money comes in. Instead of all at once up front, it'd be like a better return, but it would be over the long run. So adding all those up, we have the revenue numbers here per year and gross profit when you're subtracting those cost of goods sold. Now back to the valuation page. Going with those new numbers, we can see I did adjust down a decent amount. The old valuation for 2024, I had 414 million, kind of building off that too high number for 2023. And I just had them growing at a standard 1.44 rate annually is basically what I did. Clearly that didn't happen for this past year, and it's kind of adjusted everything downward. And maybe that 1.44 or 44% compound annual growth rate was a little aggressive, at least over the short term before Neutron gets going. So 392 revenues for 2024 is what I landed on instead of 414, 575 instead of 596, and then we have 782, 1.046 billion, and almost 1.5 billion in 2028. I threw in a 2029 number for kicks because we're starting to get close. I like to look far out in the future, and I think a lot of that Neutron growth is going to hit around that kind of time frame when things really get going with a big cadence, and each launch makes such a big deal. We're talking 50 plus million versus just 7.5 million. So each launch is a lot more capital for the company. Doing calculations on the cost of goods sold. So this is basically just the inverse of the gross margins, right? And we did see on that sheet previously, gross margins were about 29% non-GAAP, and they're supposed to trend upwards to like 32%, I believe, Q1 2024. So assuming that continues to trend in the right direction, I'm giving them 35% gross margin here, 2024, and kind of some continued improvement, nothing massive, but 38%. And then I feel like, call me crazy, but I think the Neutron revenue will hit gross margins first while they're still ramping, because it's really with cadence that the margins get good. So that Neutron revenue will actually have poor gross margins until it's really good gross margins, meaning that it'll take a while to really get really good. Then I have 2027, 42% and 45%. So SG&A, I'm kind of just projecting modest increases. I actually did project a decrease in R&D 2025 once like Neutron becomes more of an operational product as opposed to an R&D project. So I subtracted some R&D that year, 15%. And let's just skip down to the net income line here. So obviously, we really know pretty much 2023 what we're looking at. 2024, I actually have net income improving pretty dramatically, still negative, negative 124 million. And then 2025, pushing towards profitability, still a little bit negative, but looking very much better. 2026 is where I have them, turning fully positive and just going from there, things starting to look really good for them. But I am, of course, definitely open to feedback on basically any of these numbers because they can really have a ripple effect down the line as things do compound in the future. The other thing to note, though, is that I'm actually lagging their SPAC projection chart here at the bottom left. I think it may have been a little overly optimistic, or maybe that's just me being overly pessimistic. So 2023 revenue, 251 million, will slightly lag their projections, but you can see my 392 clearly less than 450, 575 clearly much less than 749. So if you do believe that these are still accurate numbers here, again, you can grab a copy of this spreadsheet, just plug in those actual numbers, and you'll get very different valuations. I do hope they do hit those numbers. I just think it may be a little bit overly optimistic, especially given the growth rate that we did see in 2023. They're already missing a bit on those numbers. So now as we look out 5 years from now, what we're basically going to do is use a discount rate of 15%. I did use 12% in a previous video. A viewer did say he thought that was a little low. I kind of thought about it and decided I do agree with him. Maybe it is a little low. I bumped that up to 15 just to be on the safer side of things. I switched out the shares outstanding to go up basically at a steady rate like it has been. And what we do is we take their net income number, we divide it by the number of shares outstanding, and multiply it by a price to earnings multiple to get a terminal value in 2028. Once you have that terminal value, you multiply it by the discount rate per year, bringing it to a value today. So I did bump up the price to earnings multiple. Now, maybe you think this is too high. I suppose it could be. You could do a 35, even a 20. I think a company in 2028 growing at the rate that I have projected here for Rocket Lab like maybe a 40 multiple is fair. Some historicals like Maxar I've seen trade at 30s. Aerospace industry average is apparently 33 according to Equivista, but this all depends on growth rates as well. Yeah, it really just depends. We have the old school companies not growing as fast like Northrop and Boeing, more like 22, 13. So I picked 38. You can change that if you want. Obviously, it changes things. The revenue numbers have been adjusted downward since that last model I made like a year ago. With a 38 multiple, we're looking at a $21 per share value in 2028 and a $9 per share value today. So let me know what you think of that. Maybe some people are angry out there. Sometimes I get comments saying, oh, it's clearly going to be over $100 per share at that point. And I guess my question is, where is that coming from? We went through the launches. Do you think I'm low on the number of launches? Do you think I'm low on the space systems growth? Or do you think I'm low on margins somewhere? Like, where am I low? That's what I want to know, because I want to drill right down. Don't just like throw out a number. Or maybe you think I'm low on price to earnings, and that's fine. If you want to bump it to 100, thinking maybe it's 100, we can do that. And then suddenly the value today is 24 and the terminal value is 55. To justify that kind of a price to earnings multiple, the stock will have to be, the earnings will have to be growing quite rapidly, but maybe you think that's fair. So I try to be safe in these models. I'm putting in 30. I could go even lower, 38. I could go 35 or 30. The thing is, I'm pretty comfortable with the result. Sorry, but let's throw in a 30 here to be more safe. You know, if this is what it is, I'm comfortable with the result, right? You buy it today for $4 a share. You have something in 5 years worth $17 per share. That's a solid return. I mean, it's not like the 100x. I'm not going around promising 100x to people. Like, you know, that just doesn't happen every day. So if 17 is what it is in 2028, I won't be upset. I think it could be higher. With all these estimates, I have tried to be safe. So let's put this back to 38, and obviously every number you change has a massive ripple effect, changing everything. So 21 in 2028 in a kind of safe scenario, in my opinion. And if you want to go to 2029 where things get even crazier, we're talking a net income number in 2029, you know, far exceeding 2028 as the Neutron really takes off. That's when things start to get even more exciting. Now we're looking at $33 per share in 2029, which is like an even bigger multiple on your money. Of course, you know, there will be inflation and all that. That's where the discount rate of 15% comes into play. And today's value would be $12 per share. Yeah, really want to hear what you guys think of all of these numbers, whether it's the discount rate, whether it's the price to earnings ratio, whether it's the revenue numbers, and do reference how I landed on them and which portion you think is low. If there's one thing I think I was a little low on, maybe it's space systems, and I can be more optimistic about their growth in the future on that space systems line of business. I was fairly perhaps pessimistic with only a 25% growth rate, but it's just so hard because launch, we know the number of launches they're planning to do, or roughly. Space systems is so hard. So yeah, I just picked a number there, and you know, maybe I'll go back, try a scenario where space systems grows at 40% per year, and then that'll be reflected in the price to earnings here. It could bump that up extremely significantly. So, you know, as I said, I'd like to err on the downside. I'd rather be pleasantly surprised where the stock price goes even higher than expected than upset if I think it's going to go super well and, you know, it doesn't. So that's kind of my thinking on those revenue projections. Thank you guys so much for watching. It's very much appreciated if you made it to the end. I know this has been quite a long video, but I think these numbers, while they can be dry, are extremely important for making sure that you know your investment well, you're comfortable with their financial position, and you know, everything that you think it'll be worth in the future really lines up with reality. We are getting a few more Rocket Lab YouTubers out there these days, so thank you guys for sticking with me as well. If you haven't already subscribed, please do. It's very much appreciated. Thanks you again, by the way, to every channel member. That's been growing. We have, I believe, 6 now. Thank you to each and every one of you guys. It gives me the motivation to keep going with the channel, with a small channel like this. I hope you guys have a great day and a great rest of the week. I'll see you soon in the next video. Bye for now.